If you remember, you probably learned in school about the show trials in the Soviet Union back in the 1930s, engineered by Stalin when he decided he had to get rid of all the people who had assisted him in assuming power after the Russian Revolution, after getting rid of, after Lenin died, after Trotsky was murdered. Just on and on. Well, and went into exile. But Stalin, in order to consolidate his power, decided for these show trials. And the show trials in 1936, if you remember, it marked the start of what was called the Great Purge. And it set the pattern for other show trials that followed. You know where I'm going with this? Because this thing about former FBI Director Comey is exactly that. James Comey's charge is a show trial. And there are a number of reasons why it's being done the way it's being done. But one of the reasons is to divert as much as this fucking toilet rat can divert attention away from the Epstein files. Just like the little Christian scum bastard Mike Johnson, who is refusing to seat a duly elected member of the U.S. House because she will then provide the vote to force the release of these files. I mean, this is where we are, folks. This is not bullshit. This is not because I sit up here in the foothills of North Georgia mountains staring at the hawks flying overhead going, whoopie-doo, time to smoke some weed. No, this is happening. So the first show trial in 1936 was held in Moscow. And what I researched says the trials were held before something called the Military Collegium of the Supreme Court. So who was on trial back then? Well, there were 16 prominent Bolsheviks, including a couple who were Jews, because the Jews were heavily involved in the Russian Revolution until the Christian fascist Joseph Stalin, who at one time his mother wanted him to be a priest. Yes, indeed. A Russian Orthodox priest, believe it or not. But included in the 16 Bolsheviks were a couple of Jews, Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev, both of whom had been close allies of Lenin and early leaders of the Communist Party. So they were charged, the charges against them, they were accused of forming the so-called Trotskyite, Zinoviite Terrorist Center. That's what it was called. I'm sure I'm garbling up the Russian there, but that organization supposedly plotted to assassinate Stalin and overthrow the Soviet government. Now, the truth was, according to historians, how would we know? We weren't there. But according to historians, the charges were completely fabricated, such as the case against James Comey. The defendants, these 16, had been arrested months earlier, isolated, coerced into confessing, which means they were tortured. And the type of torture used on these people who would wind up in the Soviet show trials, the torture was psychological and physical. And the trials, when they eventually happened, they were publicly broadcast and covered extensively in the Soviet press. And the people put on trial were portrayed by the leadership of the Soviet Union as being traitors and murderers. Now, the filthy, stinking toilet rat Donald Trump has not gone so far as to accuse James Comey of being a murderer, but he has accused him of being a traitor. Guilty. A dirty cop, over and fucking over again. So the verdict in these show trials, being the type of proceedings that they were, the verdict, all 16 were found guilty. And within hours of being found guilty, they were taken out and executed by firing squad. The outcomes of those Soviet show trials were preordained, like I said. Now, we don't have that potential outcome here. There's no way Comey is even going to go to trial, much less be found guilty. But almost all the accused in the Soviet show trials were found guilty, executed. And the more the more important thing to me, important in a bloody, awful, horrible, horrific, dark ages sense, was that the trials in the Soviet Union justified widespread arrests, deportations, detentions, and eventually execution of millions of ordinary citizens accused of what the Soviets called, or Stalin and his cadre of monsters called, counter-revolutionary activities. What did that mean? It could mean something as simple as protesting, writing a poem that was anti-Soviet, carrying a sign as you marched through Red Square saying this is not right. But the show trials also demonstrated and consolidated in a way of using fear and terror that really has been unmatched. Even the fucking monster Adolf Hitler wasn't as adept at insane terror population-wide as Stalin was. But it demonstrated his absolute power, which is what the fucking toilet rat Donald Trump is trying to do here. And those trials created a climate of fear that defined Soviet life, up to and including the collapse of the Soviet Union and the establishment of the Russian Federation, which is what we deal with now. But the people in Russia now are heirs to and still experience that kind of fear. Look what happens in Russia when somebody becomes a political dissident, someone that the monster Vladimir Putin decides to put a fucking target on their back. What happens to them? Well, they're sent to prison because they did something bad, and then, oh my goodness, they caught a flu and died, and their corpse was found in a snowdrift in Siberia. Or a reporter in Moscow who has gone too far in criticizing Putin, her corpse is found in the hallway of her apartment building, riddled with bullets. Oh, nobody knows who did it. Or other people who, for some strange reason, after criticizing Vladimir Putin, the people decide to jump out windows and commit suicide. We are on kind of a starting point of that kind of situation in this country. I know nobody pays attention to shit. Somebody just tuning into this podcast are going to say probably, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? What's his name, Malloy? Oh my Jesus Christ, what's he talking about? Well, what am I talking about? I think the opening salvo of what I'm talking about happened this morning at 10 o'clock Eastern time in court in was it Fairfax, Virginia? Alexandria, Virginia. So moving to that, just to provide a synopsis, which you probably do not need, because I'm sure you have been following some of this stuff today. But Comey appeared in federal court, Alexandria, faced charges of making a false statement, for Christ's sake, and obstructing a congressional, Jesus Christ. Now, the charges, if you're not familiar, stem from testimony that he gave before Congress 5 years ago about the FBI's investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server and alleged ties between Trump, his 2016 campaign, and Russia. Now, everything in those charges ultimately were proven unfounded. There was not enough evidence, even though I think everybody in the intelligence community knows full well, especially the ones who were around 10 years ago. They know absolutely that Russia had an influence on the American election in 2016. Absolutely. It was targeted, it was specific, and it succeeded. And this filthy fucking idiot, Donald Trump, the useful idiot, as Stalin used to refer, or Lenin used to refer to people who were sympathetic to the kind of Soviet communism that was being forced on the Russian people. That was Lenin's statement. Useful idiots, people who could not see what they were really doing. Well, we have them in this country too, and most of them wear red hats that say, "Make America great again." Jesus. In that testimony that Comey is now accused of committing perjury, he was asked whether he had authorized a leak about the Clinton investigation, and he just said no. But the indictment that was brought today alleges that when he gave that testimony, he knew he had authorized another person to leak to the media. And that is going to turn out to be the most ridiculous, non-factual, made-up bullshit ever to come out of the evil fucking brains of this cadre of fascists who work around Donald Trump. Now, the case has gotten all this publicity in large part because Comey is and has been for a very long time a very major critic, a top critic of the toilet rat. And the toilet rat, how many times has the son of a bitch called for his political opponents like Comey to be prosecuted? Huh? Yeah, lots. In fact, a few days ahead of this indictment, Trump posted on his Pravda social toy platform urging Pam Bondi to go forward with the cases against Comey, New York Attorney General Letitia James, Senator Adam Schiff. I mean, what the fuck? Trump is so fucking ignorant. He doesn't realize he's poisoning whatever case he might think he has to begin with. You can't do what he's doing and succeed in getting the kind of verdict against the people who've been so mean to me. They just made me sit in court and all I could do is fart and everybody talked about my farts. I mean, this guy is, well, he is what he is. And the toilet rat celebrated Comey's indictment shortly after the charges were unveiled the other day. And once again, the toilet rat called Comey a dirty cop who lied. Trump accusing somebody of lying? Jesus fucking Christ. This is, if you need any more evidence, there is none, that he has become totally fucking senile, demented. It's when he accuses someone else of being a liar, unless, and this may be more real than his dementia, unless you consider that to the toilet rat, no matter what he says, he honestly believes it has received wisdom. It is truth. It is nothing but the truth. So help him, Jesus bleeding Christ, or whoever it is he celebrates out of, who the fuck knows. But proving the case against Comey, get the fuck out of town. That's not going to happen. And as you know, the little brief history, the prosecutor's office in the Eastern District of Virginia, where these charges were brought, there was a whole lot of turmoil before the case was brought. Eric Siebert, who was he was serving at the time U.S. attorney for that district, left. He stepped down. And of course, the toilet rat said, "I fired him. He didn't resign." Yeah, fuck you. But he stepped down during the pressure from the toilet rat to quickly bring charges. And he made it very clear that there was no evidence. There wasn't sufficient evidence to even pursue this bullshit, much less take it before a grand jury. But somehow the new prosecutor, this incompetent freak named Lindsay Halligan, who had served as a White House aide, she was more or less a secretary, and her legal expertise was involved in defending cases against insurance companies. She was picked by the ignorant savage to replace Siebert. Now, the grand jury that approved 2 of the 3 charges against Comey was divided. 14 of the 23 jurors approved the 2 counts, which was just over the necessary 12-vote threshold. And jurors rejected another count that this silly bitch Halligan tried to bring that accused Comey of making a false statement. So here we are, Comey's legal team, which I understand, I don't have the names in front of me, but I understand that they are probably the most powerful legal team ever put together. They will probably file this motion to dismiss the case on the grounds that Comey's being politically targeted. Well, no shit. And all they have to do is point to the toilet rat's obscene, numerous comments, especially when he wrote that post on his little toy media platform telling Pam to go ahead and get Comey. People, our supporters are going to think we're not serious. Go get him, Pam. Jesus fucking Christ. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. The Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.